Now, having framed the problems of metaphysics, in particular, what our pre-Socratic philosophers were looking into, let's take a look at the views of Heraclitus, and that's what we will be doing for the rest of this particular session. And just a few facts about Heraclitus. He's born around 500 BCE, and remember, these are kind of conjectures based on, and really the way they're based is they start with Thales, and they figure everybody, when they started writing their philosophical stuff, they were about 40 years old, so they kind of did an interpolation, did an estimation, so they got this number 500 BCE, before the Common Era, for Heraclitus in Ephesus, a place north of Miletus in Asia Minor, probably somewhere in Turkey today. And Heraclitus was known in antiquity, in the old days, back in ancient Greece, in the times of, when Plato, when Aristotle referred to him. He was known as the obscure. And you can see, in piecing together the views of the Milesians, you realize there's not a lot of evidence that we're going on. We're going on the testimony of some of the major figures in philosophy who looked at the history of philosophy, like Plato and Aristotle. And you notice what we get from the real ancients was these poetic comments. We saw, especially in the case of Anaximander, he starts talking about the opposites and their justice and the strife between them in very poetic terms, things that I know I have difficulty following poetry. I'm not exactly a fan of poetry. I wish they would state things a little bit more clearly, but you notice, even in the old days, and they were following the tradition of Homer and Hesiod, the great poets, where they told their stories. Even back in those days, they regarded Heraclitus in particular as being obscure. And even today, it's really difficult to understand what Heraclitus is talking about, even though we do have more textual evidence, because Heraclitus's writing was really what you might call, or literary, dark and aphoristic style that he used. He talks in riddles. It seems that he loved to appear to contradict himself, which really makes it difficult, to understand what it is that he's saying. And in fact, some of his doctrines sound incoherent, self-contradictory, even if perhaps he didn't intend them to be that way. Now, Heraclitus had a really negative reaction to the Milesians, to Thales and Anaximenes, the guy who were proposing the material causes of cause of the universe. I guess they didn't agree about which material it was. But notice, for the Milesians, for Thales, for Anaximander, for Anaximenes, what was real is fixed and permanent. Thales, water, fixed, permanent. The ocean's there. That's the thing that brought everything forth. Anaximander, the apiron, that primordial mixture, this crazy mixture of all the opposites. It's real, it's fixed, it's permanent. Anaximenes, air, and the continuum of elements from fire on the way down to rock. They're all fixed, real, and permanent. And notice, they realize things change in the world. That's why they're accounting for change. That's why Anaximander and Anaximenes are accounting for the change. Anaximander in terms of the war between the opposites, and Anaximenes in terms of, rarefaction and condensation, that is, squeezing the stuff together and spreading it out. But so change is somehow to be explained away. Things change, but that change is to be explained. They understood changes as alterations in the basic underlying material stuff, which is, in its own nature, unchanging. That is, the material stuff really is unchanging. Now, Heraclitus kind of reverses this. Notice the Milesians, what's real and fixed is material, and changes are just explained away as alterations in the material. But Heraclitus goes exactly in the opposite direction. When he looks around, and what he sees all over is change. Nothing lasts for any long period of time. Take a person. Let's go back and once again think about the what I called early on in the semester the philosopher of Theseus. The changing pictures. I showed you pictures of me as a baby, a younger man, and the old guy that I've become. And eventually I'm going to fade out of existence. I'm going to go out of existence. I'm going to die. Well, Heraclitus looks at that and says, in the grand scheme of things, I'm never the same. I'm changing throughout my existence. Look around at everything. Everything is changing its existence, whether it's a living thing or geology. I imagine he didn't know about geology, but certainly we have a better idea today. Change is what is real. That is the basis of the universe. The permanence, the material that hangs around all the time, or supposedly, but we see it's going in, that's only apparent. That's what needs to be explained away. And let's take a look at what Professor Irwin has to say in his classical philosophy book. He says, Heraclitus relies on this compositional criterion of continuity, identity through time, the professor of Theseus kind of thing, in claiming that the sun does not really persist from one day to the next, because it is a new mass of fire each day, and that we cannot step into the same river twice. Let's go back. He's viewing the sun as being, a fire. And not that far off, I guess. We talk about nuclear explosions today. All stars are powered by nuclear energy, but it's to a large extent an inferno, a big fire. If you think about a fireplace, the fire, you can keep it going from day to day if you have a fireplace. Or even think about the boiler and that heats your house, your apartment. The fire is going on, but it's really a new fire. You keep feeding it with new fuel. If you were heating the house through the way they did in the old days, a couple hundred years ago, with fires in fireplaces and log cabins, that kind of scenario, what happens? You have to keep on feeding wood in it. It's really a new fire all the time. And then he says this about, and we cannot step into the same river twice. The water constituting a river is always flowing away and being replaced. If you look at a river, the water is always coming in, going out. It's always moving. There's a current. Since loss of constituents means destruction, that is, the individual water, the particles of water are being lost constantly. They're being destroyed. Each river is always being destroyed and being replaced by a different river. Hence, no continuous subject, that is the same river, exists at any two times. There is simply a process. That is, what's real is the process of change. Continuing with that second paragraph. This argument applies not only to the things with evidently transitory components, such as rivers. That is, he's telling us it doesn't apply just to the things that it's pretty clear that they have, that they're in a state of transition, that they're changing, such as rivers, but also to apparently stable things such as ships, trees, and animals, as we saw in the ship of Theseus example. Each of these things grows and decays and interacts with other things. Its composition changes. And since identity is determined by composition, it is passing out of existence all the time to be replaced by something else. Since human beings constantly change in some way, no one is strictly the same person from one time to the other. The ship of Theseus, everything is changing. What keeps it the same thing over time? It really isn't. Heraclitus, and notice he has a slightly different spelling than we do, infers that everything flows and nothing remains stable. We're wrong to believe that ordinary subjects, such as Socrates, for example, a person persists through change. The naive belief in persisting subjects with opposite properties, sounds like the Milesians, at different times turns out to be confused. For though we accept this naive belief, we also accept the compositional criteria of continuity, and therefore we must admit that ordinary things are not stable. His point is, the Milesians are wrong. They admit that things are changing. They're not the same thing over time. Therefore, that can't be the basic component of the universe, the basic component of our ontology, but the basic component, in some sense, has got to be change. Now let's take a look at it, because this is something that's sometimes called the doctrine of flux, and there are a few other doctrines that are attributed to Heraclitus that are sort of interesting. We're going to move on from here to spend some time trying to look at these various doctrines and see what we end up with, the picture of the world, the ontology we end up with from Heraclitus.